Hi, this is your Watchman on the Wall, Hal Lindsey, and I'm back with the second session on Hal on the Hot Seat. That is, I'm going to answer some of the questions, or attempt to answer some of the questions that have been emailed in. I appreciate the questions. Some of them are very good. And I feel that all of them are important if they're important to you. So let's take a couple of questions. A lot of these have to do with the subject of the rapture. That is, that sudden coming of Jesus Christ secretly to snatch out every living believer before the beginning of the tribulation period. That's phase one of the second coming. There are a lot of questions that focus around this, and I was asked, explain the meaning of Matthew chapter 24, verses 40 through 41. So let me turn to that. It's just after the section where it says that the coming of the Lord would be like the days of Noah. And immediately after that, it says, then there shall be two men in the field. One will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken, and one will be left. Luke adds one other dimension to this. He comments on the same issue, and he says there will be two people sleeping in the same bed. One will be taken, the other one will be left. So he adds a dimension that in one place there'll be people working out in the field. You do that in the daytime. In another place, he says that they will be two people sleeping in the same bed. One will be taken, one will be left. You know, the Holy Spirit showed right there that he is the one inspiring it, because at that time men didn't know that the earth was round and that it rotated around the sun, and therefore on one side of the earth people would be sleeping, on the other side of the earth they'd be working in the field. So we have to say, that's a P.S. from God saying, P.S. I wrote this, you didn't know it then. Some of the people around here are laughing. And even Brutus got up and snorted on that, my dog. But at any rate, what does this mean? Well, it means the Lord is going to come suddenly and snatch out people. And in this case, he's going to snatch one and another will be left, and so forth. This is a perfect statement about the rapture, because these are people that are going to be snatched out before the tribulation begins. This is before it's going to be sudden and so forth. Now, a lot of people say, well, no, this happens just at the same time that Jesus comes back to the earth. Well, here's the problem that you have with that. If every believer were to be snatched out of the world instantaneously, which is what's going to happen in the rapture, just before Christ comes back to the earth, well, then there's another part of Matthew on this prophetic section, Matthew 25, verse 31. When the Lord returns to the earth, immediately it says, I'll read it, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne, and all Gentiles, literally, will be gathered before him, and he will separate them from one another as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He goes on to explain this, that the sheep will be put on his right side, and they're the ones that go into the kingdom that he's going to set up on the earth after he returns to the earth. And those that are goats are unbelievers. They're going to be cast off the earth. Now, if the incident in Matthew 24, 40 and 41 occurred simultaneously with this, as some try to teach, the believers would have already been separated. He would have just snatched them out, and the unbelievers would have been left. So there would have been no basis for him, at the first thing he does, to gather before him all Gentiles and to separate the believers and unbelievers. They would already have been just separated. Furthermore, in the rapture, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 50 through 54, it says that in the rapture, he is going to transform every believer from mortal to immortality, from corruptible to incorruption, in the twinkling of an eye, which today would mean a nanosecond, a fraction of a nanosecond. Now, if this occurs simultaneously with Christ coming back to the earth, all of the believers would have already been instantly brought up to meet Christ in the air, and they would have been transformed from mortal to immortal. And that means there would be no mortal believers left on earth. So then you couldn't go into, there wouldn't be any possibility to start a kingdom, because the kingdom is going to be filled with mortal believers from the tribulation who survived the tribulation as mortals. And so you say, well, how do you know that? Well, Isaiah chapter 65 says that in those days in the kingdom, a man will be a child at 100 years old. And if he dies before 100, he'll be considered accursed. Now, it talks about having death. If the kingdom that Jesus sets up on earth when he comes back in the second coming were heaven or eternity, there couldn't be any death. And he says that also there would be childbearing. There's not going to be childbearing, but we're going to be like the angels in heaven. So you see, those two events have to be separated by a period of some time. And the only logical place, and I've got a book I wrote on this called Vanished, which goes into all the theological details in the simplest manner that I could put them. And I show that there are all kinds of differences between this event where he takes one and leaves the other. Two people working in the field, one taking the other left. The one that's left is the unbeliever. That's the one that's going to go through the tribulation. So that roughly is getting into the meaning of that.